going to kick off by introducing them from left to right. On my furthest left, we have Makhosazana Zwane-Siguqa. Now, she also goes by the name Khosi. And she is absolutely fabulously the former editor of Drum Magazine and True Love. She was also head of content at Tencent Africa. She holds 2 master's degrees from Stellenbosch University, one in journalism, one in future studies. And I'm just so excited to have you on the panel today because you are telling us, you're bringing that magazine angle, which is traditionally where women audiences have been found. So really thrilled to have you on the panel. Let's give her a little round of applause. To her right is, the fabulous Ferial Haffajee. I don't know if she needs much of an introduction. Ferial has been, my inspiration, my role model, and my mentor for so many years. But if you happen to not know her, I don't know if you've been living under a rock, let me explain. She's the former editor-in-chief of Mail and Guardian, the first woman editor-in-chief of City Press. But more than that, she's someone who I just think of as being incredibly curious. And she's driven by that curiosity. She's not driven by status, really. She's not really driven by achievements. She's driven by going, what's working and what's not, and why isn't it working? It's why Ferial is investigating potholes in the city of Joburg, even though this is a woman who's won the International Press Freedom Hero Award. She also co-leads engagement at Daily Maverick, where she is now currently associate editor under the fabulous Gillian Green, who is the editor-in-chief, also first female editor there of that title. So a round of applause for Ferial. And then to my left, I have Nicki Gules, who I am determined to drag into the spotlight. Nicki is the woman behind the most influential news title in South Africa, and I firmly believe that as someone who watches the news, and that is News 24. Now, you might think, well, no, surely like a broadcaster is bigger, but I often think News 24 is more influential because so many broadcasters draw on it to inform their news. So I think it's an incredibly influential title, and I wanted to have the woman behind the title here because this is a driving force. She's been there for 2 years. Before that, Nicki has been a top editor in South Africa's biggest newsrooms. She's sort of bounced between Sunday Times and City Press, but no matter what she's done, she's earned a reputation as being an incredible news editor. Her role now is head of news, but nobody can really work a newsroom the way Nicki can. The art of putting together a newspaper is so damn difficult, and I have seen this woman in action, and I'm in such awe of her. I bumped into somebody who has worked for you, and she said she'd come just for you to this this event, because you were just one of her favorite bosses. So thank you for joining me, Nicki. A round of applause for Nicki.
Thanks, Verashni.
Okay, so I want to kick off with a 1-minute reflection from each of you about your thoughts on today's a topic, and perhaps bouncing off Sispat's thoughts, your wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much for that, Sispat, earlier today. So let's start with you, Nicki, and then move our way along the panel. What are your thoughts on what we heard, on your thoughts on this topic and women in news?
Well, there was so much for me in what Sispat had to say. I mean, I wanted to stand up and cheer when she said that, the long hours in newsrooms, it's just a mandatory requirement for the job. And thinking of how many hours I spent in newsrooms. And it was only when I worked for a woman boss, which was Ferial, where I could, schlep my children to, a newsroom. And for those women journalists who think you're going to emotionally damage them, it was some of the best years of their life. They still speak about it. So no harm. But it was...
No children were hurt in the making of this newspaper.
No children were harmed at all. But it's so key because if you look at how the patriarchy works and how men prop each other up so well, and how women are very often left to put the paper to bed. Do you know what I mean? So it's. And what Patisa said about the caring professions and how you can't, it's very difficult to be a journalist in these conditions. And for me, it's an absolute no-brainer why 25% of top leadership, only 25% of top leadership worldwide of news organizations are women, because these are incredible constraints. But that said, I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled that we are. Well, at News 24, we're at least able to make strides with most of our top leadership being women into women audiences and so on. So I do think that there was a lot, and also for democracy. I mean, Bridget, my friend who's a community activist in Melville, who's just been, at the forefront of the water crisis there, which we all know about. It's those issues and her ability. She's such an example for me of trying to get different communities together and all coalesce around the same issue. Women have a great superpower with this. I mean, and that's why it's so crucial for me to get women to be more involved in the fundamentals of democracy. And as we head towards the local government elections, we absolutely need more of that. And our women are our best sources.
Okay. Great opening thoughts. Lots to unpack there. Ferial?
So just with a fabulous room like this, and because of what we're looking at today, may I take just a moment to recognize the passing of a sister journalist.
Yeah.
Frida Ho passed away the day before yesterday, and there was a sister who could tell a story.
I didn't actually know that.
Where she placed herself, the story she chose to do. I was looking through them today, and one of her last stories was of the closure of a transgendered clinic in Hillbrow after the cuts in aid by the USA. And it was just told with such empathy and humor and joy that I thought we should just reflect for a moment on her passing and wish her safe transitions and love to her family, of course. So Varash, when I became an editor many years ago now, I can't believe how long ago, it was a thing, hey? It was still headline news, first editor of the Mail and Guardian. And I remember I didn't at the time realize that the gendered aspect of it was going to be quite so big, because the place had always been progressive and run by women. But when I realized it, I had to think and reflect quite deeply about what it means to be a feminist editor, what it means to not wear braces and smoke a cigar. I'll tell you a story about that later, what one of my GMs said to me. And then to be a feminist investigative editor. And it meant, those were very big and purposeful roles, and I needed to think how to bring a feminist and a gendered lens to everything I was doing. But it strikes me on listening to you, Pat, this morning, that it's like the great man whose house we are in today. It's like he said, it's a long walk to freedom, because these are exactly the same debates we were having back in those times, and I look forward to sharing more. Huh?
Thank you so much, Ferial, and thank you for remembering Frida, an amazing journalist.
Amazing.
Khosi?
Yeah, sure. Thank you
It's
very
not
much.
working.
Is it not working?
Oh,
Can you
there.
get Khosi's mic?
Always happens to
There
me.
we are.
Shall I give the
Is it
handheld?
working now? Is it working now?
No, I don't know if it's on.
can't
Do we know if
hear
it's on?
myself, so I can't really tell.
Oh.
Great stuff.
Is it working now? Is it? Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much, Verashni, and everybody else. Good morning. I think that Patisa narrated this very well earlier in a manner that I do not think that can be replicated in the same fashion, really. I just want to add that information disorder, which comes in the form of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, I believe are one of the greatest threats to our democracy. And when you unpack all those words and their understanding, you will realize that they were all designed to alienate us as women. They were all designed to reinforce the patriarchy in particular, because we are in South Africa, the African patriarchy, because I think that we all understand what patriarchy is, but very few of us who happen to be invited in these spaces have lived experience of the true brutality of African patriarchy and what it means for generations to come, and the true exclusion of it as well, especially against women. Look, it does impact men as well, because they have to live up to certain expectations that are not realistic, but it is particularly brutal towards women like myself and women like yourselves who have made it out of that system into the spaces. And just to add, obviously the exclusion of the second layer of the watchdogs, as it were, which have actually been rendered pretty useless in the advent of social media, but we have to always guard for the imbalance in policy making whenever women are excluded from any conversation. Whenever we are not in any conversation, trust me, I have seldom come across a man who would deliberately, intentionally put our agenda and our experience at the table. So the less we are mentioned, the better off the status quo is viewed. And we just stay in our corners and whisper to each other. I was telling to Isaac earlier that it is so encouraging to see people like him and people like the gentleman in front joining us in this conversation, because too often we speak amongst ourselves.
Yes.
And then we go operate in a world where men are the ones who make the final decisions.
No, we are in silos. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I've concluded my opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Khosi. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those wise thoughts. And I have to say thanks to the men in the room too. I had a couple of men ask me if they're serious that they were invited to this. Women's Day events tend to be pink things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Where we talk about women issues, but these are really issues that are of national and international import. So I want to dive a bit into the numbers. You saw on the video we showed that news avoidance, I think, was almost double that for women than it was for men. But an interesting thing emerges in South Africa. Those were global stats. And I want to go to Nicki first. Nicki, firstly, how big is News 24's audience? And then what is the gender split?
Well, when I was doing my research on this for the last 2 days, I was quite shocked myself, really. So we have 4 million page views a day on average, which translates to about 500,000 unique browsers a day.
Which are people.
Which are people,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's
500,000
500,000 people a day
yeah.
checking your website out.
Yeah, exactly. And we have, of that, we have 120,000 subscribers. So those are people who pay every month to be to have unlimited access to our content. But our gender split is 50-50, bang on. It's not a point something, it's exactly 50-50. But that is overall. But when you get to the subscriptions and people who have subscriptions, it is a little bit skewed for men. I think that's because men have more money. I don't know. The pay gap, we still have that. So it's slightly skewed to men, but not much. It's by a few thousand. So it's not that that significant. And it's interesting also what women consume. So we have the top stories, the news, the politics, and the investigation. So women are there reading those and consuming that content. So we have, but it's very interesting when you go lower down, and I think that this speaks to how much time women have to consume the news. We have, so out of all of our women readers, we have 20% of them who engage with the top stories, who read the top stories. And then as you go further down, deeper into the site,
20% of the people engaging with the top stories, or the women themselves?
Of the women themselves.
So the top stories above, I just got off. The top stories above the fold, for those who aren't aware, are your hardest news stories. Those are...
Yeah, your top ranked stories.
Yeah.
So in our case, that'll be like the top 7, right? So the top ranked stories, 20% of the women subscribers or the audience read those. But then the deeper you go into the site, the more women drop off. And
That's
I think,
interesting.
yeah, and I think that speaks to how much time women have to actually, consume the news. I mean, I look at myself, right? If it wasn't for text to speech, I wouldn't be,
a functioning human.
A functioning human to be able to cook at the same time. So in terms of but the interesting thing is the preferences. So women are very much the News 24 women audience are very much into news, then crime and court.
That's interesting.
Then politics, and only then business.
Okay.
But business audiences have always been historically male dominant.
Yes.
As
Yes. As I
I've
understand
known
it
that
too,
for
yeah.
years. But interesting, it's top stories, then news, then politics, then business.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing those stats with us. We're going to come back to you more to hear more about the other sections of News 24 that appeal to women. But I find that quite interesting. But part of me wonders if it's true for the newsroom for women or for all women? Because it does seem quite specific to your female audiences. And so I'd like to get a different view from Ferial. Ferial, you've been having so much fun at Daily Maverick, also just a giant of the media in South Africa, of independent media in South Africa. And you've been doing some really interesting things with newsletters and taking audiences' concerns and really using that to enormously inform your journalism. And my question to you was, looking at it from a gendered lens, what has led to engagement from women in this kind of audience engagement work you've been doing and steeping yourself in the past few years?
Thank you, Varash. So I think I've told a few friends the story is my mom only ever had one house which belonged to them, and it was her small place in Mayfair. So she passed away last year at 95 years old, and she just would not move from there. No matter what, like, Ma, you must move now. We go, no, it's my house. You know? So anyway, I spent a lot of time in Mayfair where I grew up. And then I started noticing that suddenly there were a lot of electricity cuts and stuff, but mostly I started noticing that women were walking around the area with buckets on their heads again. And children were lugging 5-liter bottles. And this told me, like, what's happening with the water? And I started counting water cuts because I had seen this in my own neighborhood. And then, of course, just covering it for years and years and years, you kind of could anticipate that we were heading for a massive water crisis in Joburg. But it very much started in my mother's small room, watching other women experience this, the taps being turned off. And it was a story very close to my heart because as a young journalist, some of the first stories I did in the years of freedom was the extension of taps into the yards and the homes of people who had never ever had water, and those were often women's stories. Yeah. So that is about putting a gendered lens on a story, of just being conscious of what you're seeing. And then what I've learned from there on, Varash, is that when you're touching the everyday lives of people like that, they read. Because I thought nobody at all is going to be interested in my story on traffic light outages and electricity cuts and water outages, and then they were. And I realized that's because it was touching their lives. So that was the lesson I drew, and that's why now I only do local stories, mostly.
Incredible. And I think that speaks to the lived reality of the woman on the ground. So, Khosi, I want to come to you, where magazines have traditionally been a more female space. Why is that? As much as things are starting to shift, and I love to hear that from Nicki, but why have magazines been seen as a space that is more for women?
Yeah.
What are they getting right?
Quite a question, and I'm going to need you to bear with me as I narrate to you my story.
Sure.
As to how I moved from hard news. I had a few front pages which actually won awards, but through my story, through the intersectionality of my story, I'm hoping to tell a story that you can make of it what you will. But look, it is actually a very interesting phenomenon, because since the building of media itself, mass media has always been segmented into women's interest and real news. And until to date, our DNA traces our thinking as women in the newsroom to the women's desk. I don't know if you still remember the women's desk. We have not been able to shed the women's desk mentality off. In order for us to be taken seriously as equals to a certain extent with the man in the newsroom, we had to carve our own spaces. And the women's desk has always been our spot. Sis Dolly, you know them, you know? That has been our trajectory. You always were moved towards the woman's desk, and that was you having reached it. You've really, really done well. Then obviously, True Love which started as a man's magazine. It started as a
True Love was a men's magazine.
True Love started as a skin magazine for men.
I had no idea.
For
Who knew
urban-
this?
Wow.
True Love used to be an alternative, a more risky alternative to Drum magazine. The Drum boys in the drum room, you know them with their cigars. Their cigars and their
The guys who go to
alcohol.
Catsy's.
Yeah. And the women danced and the men viewed.
Yeah.
That mentality, that social paradigm, that social framework literally lived in the newsroom for the longest time. And when I was appointed editor at Community Media, where I started my journalism, I was the other woman who was there used to be a gospel reporter. And then there was me and my nosy self inserting myself in Mfuleni local municipality issues, which still exist, by the way.
So much.
So there I was, and the editor retired, and I was promoted to this position. Guess what happened?
What?
Mass resignations.
Ah.
Mass
been there.
resignations. I even received death threats. My sister's right there, she'll be able to tell you. Like, this is literally my introduction into the editorship role. It was like, who do you think you are? You black girl from the township who's 24 years old coming here to tell us what to do. So that is the one story that I have to tell you, and from it you'll be able to draw out some themes, right? The second story is, after what I thought, okay, I've made it into the community space, I called Esmery Vederman, who was the first female CEO of
Media
not
24.
News 24,
Media 24. Yeah, that's bad. Yeah.
And I said, look, I think I am ready to move. And she said, okay, great, where do you see yourself? So thinking that I'm modeling myself on her trajectory, very few black female leaders at the time, I'm like, I'm going to do what you're doing. I'm going to hard news and so on. And she's like, no, I'm now at Drum, but I think you can do something more serious. Let's get you an interview somewhere else. You always need a sponsor, ladies. You know that. You must get a sponsor, somebody who believes in you. So I get this interview. Luckily, there's an opening, and it is of an associate. Well, it used to be called a managing editor, but these days we all do a bit of everything, really. That is a pretty senior one in a mainstream mainstream publication. I walk in, and there's three men. One is the owner. Not sure what he was, the owner or the publisher, but he has since passed on. The other one is a GM, and there's the editor-in-chief. I was referred to as, you're a cool, nice-looking chick, more than 4 times in that interview.
What?
When it was time to talk salaries, the owner/publisher said, my editors, or my editor who's a man, earns this much, and you cannot possibly want more than that. And when I pushed back, we were very radical back then, I was telling Pat, when I pushed back aggressively, he threw me with a line I'll never forget. He said, well, have you seen my dogs? And I said, what? He said, my dogs consume this amount of food a month. You're a single woman, you don't have any children, you can't possibly want to earn, and basically, like, compared me to what the monthly bill that his big dogs
That's shocking.
had. That threw me off. Went back to Esmery and I said, I'm not doing this. And then I ended up at Drum as news editor at Drum magazine. So what I'm trying to say is that nobody really sets out to be a woman's interest journalist. We all set out to be journalists. But in order for us to survive, in order for us to grow, in order for us to get to the next mountain, you have to make some compromises. You have to make some adjustments, which you have to live with. But you must still fight the system and fight back and see how far that gets you. The results vary, I'll have to tell you. Pushback, there's wins and there's losses. But we all have a story to tell, and structurally, everything has been basically set up, almost like against us. And we all have a story. I'm sure all of us have got a similar story to tell, where you're just disheartened and you had to go carve an issue yourself. Now, women, being the creatives that we are, will always find a way to exist. So
let me come in there.
Yeah.
Yes, because I absolutely agree with you. And I think just the way I phrased the question was also problematic. I'm hearing, from what your story tells us, is, should there be this idea of women's journalism and the rest? You know, should there be the silo? So I want to actually throw that, and thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's so fascinating and so shocking. But I want to throw it back to Nicki, because Nicki, you sent some interesting thoughts about how do we begin to change this? How do we begin to get out of the siloed mentality where women are feeling alienated by the news? Let's start talking about some of the solutions. How do we claim back those audiences?
Well, I'm very happy to report that our women's desk is dead. We do not have such.
Did you kill it, Nick?
No, it was dead when I got there, Fair. It was, I'm very happy because we can't be doing. But I think, especially, I mean, speaking for my audience, we have not so much a women alienation from news problem as a general everybody. Everyone is alienated from the news.
Yeah,
and there's so
true.
much news fatigue. And we get it, right? I mean, it takes a special sort of, I don't know, psychology to be able to interact at all times with, you know, grisly stories. And we all know the South African news cycle. It's one thing more shocking than the other. So what we have found, interestingly, and this sounds weird, but bear with me, is we've got to give people hope. So I now have a good news editor. My good news editor is there. He's got a really interesting philosophy on good news. It can't just be like, oh look, some nice corporate is throwing money at something. No, it's got to be, it's news, but it's good news. So we are foregrounding more and more good news with really interesting results to counteract that news fatigue. And the response that we get is always so positive to those stories. Like yesterday, we ran a story on a, you know, South African success stories, small SMMEs that South Africans have built and that have gone on to go do great things. And the one was Wedgwood Nougat. And the story was the most shared out of
What is the
everything
story again?
on this little company that was started in a
I saw
KZN
the
auntie's
story, the
kitchen.
nougat, yeah.
Yeah, and it went on to be this really fantastic medium enterprise. I wouldn't say it's big, but I mean it's, like it's a really good going concern. And that story was yesterday's most shared.
Oh, wow.
Out of everything News 24 published yesterday, from the Madlanga Commission disasters to and Suleiman Karim, which is an insane story, to the investigation by Jeff that we had published in the morning, all of it,
Wow.
Wedgwood Nougat was the most shared. And I think that's instructive to how we try and get over. And it's not sunshine journalism, it's not gratuitous good news, it's news. It's news.
Yeah.
But it's not. So I think, and it's something I'm quite passionate about, is we have to tell what's going on, not what's going wrong, not only what's going wrong. And this doesn't mean adopting a sunshine journalism approach. It also means, I think, that we should look at solutions journalism. So, because a lot of the time you read a story and it's like so heinous, and you know, like GBV stories do that to me. Gender-based violence. You think of like, how else can a woman get killed in this republic? Like, really?
Yeah.
So, and you end up being so disheartened, and you feel really disempowered at the end of all that. And I think if we focus a little bit more on how we can address these issues, how can these things be, what can you as a reader do to assist and to, you know, make things better in some way, then I think that gives people a bit of agency back, you know.
Okay. I love that. I hear a lot of mms from the audience. I think you guys are also agreeing with that. Ferial, I want to ask you, as someone who's been in the news for so long, have you had the same experience I spoke about earlier, where people kind of confess to you, I don't, you know, do the women in your life follow the news? The women who aren't in the news, do you find that they're following the news? And then, what are your thoughts to get them to care? What can we as journalists do differently?
So to tell a story about my cousin Zayn, there's dad, Uncle Karim. They came back from exile in Canada and to South Africa, and really part of building the new country, and very excited when I became the editor of the Mail and Guardian. Really excited in my family. Until one day my beloved uncle called me and he said, God, that's a wrist slitter. And he meant like I'm publishing a newspaper that makes him want to slit his wrists. There is no break in it. There is no beauty. It's not a reflection of the country he loves and has come back from Canada to live in and build. And now we're saying it's just a fuck up. And so he didn't like this at all. And then that really taught me that exactly what Nicki says is now you have to, those are areas at the Maverick that we call stories that delight me and give me a break. And they are inevitably the most popular and the most shared and the most liked stories. And I think that speaks to the attention deficit economy of the world, not only the country, where people have had enough of war and bad news. They do want to be distracted and they do want to be delighted. And my uncle taught me that very, very early on. Can I talk about the Book of Women and Women's
Yes, I was going to
Days?
ask you for that, but please go ahead.
Thank you. So, so when I was editor at the Mail and Guardian, I was really at the Financial Mail. One day I was sitting in the news conference and I was really, it's quite a very powerful publication, but it was completely untransformed. And I meekly put up my hand and I said, when are we getting some black or women columnists? And the response was absolutely horrified.
Really?
Where are we going to find them? Where? They're just not there, you know. And so I thought, this is not going to work really for me. So then I started putting together the little black book of black expertise across the economy, the polity, civil society, everything, engineers, whatever you wanted. Don't tell me they're not there, because they are there. And so we started this book, and then the Financial Mail loved it, because obviously it became a big money spinner. But my work in doing that, and then the Mail and Guardian's Book of Women and the Young South Africans You Must Take to Lunch, is really because I believe that's how you make space. That's how you democratize institutions. I'm surprised that we should still need lists like those or quote this woman, because I'd have assumed that at some point society democratizes and equalizes, but it doesn't do that without constant vigilance. So thanks for asking, Verash.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to get to that. So Ferial, as you guys all know, she did start these innovative products at the Mail and Guardian. This was many years ago. And so, Khosi, I want to come back to you and, this lens you've had on how the media can be, the establishment can be very anti-woman in a way. And to say, maybe, us on this panel might be patting ourselves on the back a little bit. What are the innovations that should be happening now? One thing that strikes me is that we're still very middle class, right? So I know I don't prep you for this question. I'm kind of throwing it at you. What? Can you give us a little bit of diagnosis in your view of what could we do better?
I think that we should, at this point, introspect and realize that the gatekeeping function of journalism is muted, and perhaps even permanently so. The idea that I alone will decide what 100,000 people read and say and how they react is void. We need to embrace new platforms. We need to embrace new storytellers, and we need to induct them into the ethics of our journalism. And we leverage off each other's strengths. That is what I think for far too long we've held certain sectors of the content ecosystem at arm's length, even turning our back against it with our noses in the air, without realizing that people will find information. My source of information, sadly, is no longer an established news platform. I go there to verify what I've seen on TikTok from a nuclear physicist who takes her time to unpack the stories for me in 3 minutes. And I am preaching to the converted, because I do believe that this is what you're attempting here with Explain.
Exactly.
It is to package the content in the news that I can digest, as Nicki said, while I'm eating my dinner, while supervising my child do her homework. Because women do not have time to bring it back to the woman thing. My husband is always saying to me, oh my gosh, you eat so fast. And I'm like, shut up. I used to eat much slower until I had this child. Now I have to eat so fast because I must still make sure that, I don't know, you know what I mean?
So many
So
things.
we have limited time,
Yeah.
right? Because by the
Say
time
so
he
to the
sits down,
winemaker.
yeah, by the time he sits down to eat, I'm done eating because
Yeah.
I'm ready. You know,
Yeah.
everybody has to be
So
doing
much
everything
is
else.
going on,
So
yeah.
there's so much going on. We do have very little time, but nobody really thinks about us before they create the news or their package. They think about us as an aftermath. It's like, oh, will the woman? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas we are the ones who are actually impacted by everything that happens. We're the ones who have to carry those. Ferial, how many men did you see carrying those buckets of water?
Not so many.
Oh, really? Or mostly men? Mostly
No,
women?
mostly women.
Oh, mostly women, okay.
It is mostly women, and you from where I am from, which is in the Eastern Cape these days, it is always women.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to come back to this idea of the time poverty of women and how they have less time. And that is true, again, of men and women. And something, thank you for shouting out explain. So something we've tried to do is to innovate around this, to say, you know, our weekly wrap of the news is, you know, the only source you'll need to read or consume if you don't have time to read anything else. But if you can't read it, there's a voice note. I speak it out, and I know some women who will go and have a bubble bath and just listen to it every Thursday because it's all they have capacity for. And it was to try to empower them. We're also now, I'm going to do a little plug, we're launching this influencer partnership model with the newsroom because of what Khosi has said, which is that people increasingly are going outside of these gatekept places and going directly to influencers. And that is fabulous in many ways. But Nicki, I want to come to you, as someone with 20 years, to kind of say, are there dangers to that? What would you say to people? And there's this bit of a wellness, I keep hearing this from wellness influencers, that people should start avoiding the news, that the news is bad for you, that it doesn't impact your life, that it just makes you feel bad about yourself. And I always think that's a very privileged position to take, to be able to avoid the news. But it is something that is coming through in a lot of, you know, younger spaces, social spaces, wellness spaces. You know, just avoid the news. Just go to social media for your needs. What would you say to that, Nicki?
Well, I'd say what's bad for you is really taking all your information from a news influencer on TikTok or Insta, and these people who have not been inducted into our ethics, who don't know, you know, what they. So shout out to you for this partnership, because I think that is the biggest threat that faces journalism today, and it's a credibility crisis. You know, and it's an incredibly big problem, because, you know, journalism takes money to produce. You know, we have to pay salaries and, you know, communications, cars, all that, and then an influencer will just come in, take all your work, paraphrase it, pass it off as theirs, and then what?
Yeah.
So it's incredibly important that issue gets tackled, and thank you for that. This whole idea about mental wellness, I mean, I get it. So I have my parents. My mother is a 78-year-old news junkie, and my father is increasingly adopting the head in the sand approach. So my mother, we had to shut up on the hour every hour because that was when the news was on the radio. She had a problem with her blood pressure, and my sister had the temerity to suggest that it might be because she consumed too much news. Well, joke's on me, because she was right. The blood pressure did go down for those 3 weeks, yeah, that she was off News 24.
That's a problem.
I mean,
You're not helping our cause.
no, but it really gave me, it really gave me, you know, pause to think. My father's like, oh, stay away from it, man. Oh, I can't deal with this. I mean, he's informed because my mother would tell him things. But it's really a consideration that we have to have. It's like, what impact are we having? But we can't also we can't patronize our audiences. We can't say, this is what we think you need to know. I mean, we're doing that anyway with what we assign, who we assign to stories and what stories we cover, and those decisions that we make on a daily basis. So it is definitely something that we need to look at. And that's where I come back to good news and your solutions journalism, because I think it's those feelings of unresolved, it's an unresolved despair, really. And you can't channel that. What do you do? What do you do when you feel disempowered by a story or despairing at a story? That's got to be channeled into something people can actually do.
So that's
And
the
I think
solutions-based.
Yeah, solutions journalism will help.
And
with
giving
that.
them a way forward. And I love that, and I want to come to the rest of the panel as we start to close up and before we go to the questions from the audience. So, Ferial and Khosi, whoever wants to take this one, are we thinking about this too narrowly? Are we kind of saying, oh, women aren't reading the news, but are they engaging in other ways? Are there other ways we should be reaching people, or women, or those who are fatigued by the news, or are practicing news avoidance? And if those who didn't see the video earlier, news avoidance has jumped. As much as there's spots of good news, like I love the stats you've told us, news avoidance has jumped. Should we be thinking about this in other ways? The same way, Ferial, you sat down and thought about how do we challenge this notion that there aren't black columnists? Should we be challenging this notion that there's news avoidance?
So there's a fabulous guy in the US called Brian Stevenson. I hope his name's right. He campaigns for people who are in prison when they shouldn't be, because they couldn't have lawyers, they couldn't afford it. And so when I listened to him speaking, Varash, he said, people said to him, so how do you do this? And he said one thing, you've got to get proximate. And that really stayed with me very deeply. Is I could cover the Zondo Commission. The next beat I wanted to have was the African continental free trade area, because I'm so interested in it. I wanted to become a Pan-Africanist journalist. But then this pull of being proximate or being local has really shown me what I think is the way forward for journalism, is to be of service, you have to be next door to. And that's why I want to learn the tricks of news influencers, but I honestly do not believe that news influencers are the way out of the news avoidance trap at all, because I find it's so egotistical. It's all about the I rather than journalism, which is about the we. So I've decided it's not something for me, and I'm going to find ways of using WhatsApp more cleverly, because that's where communities organize themselves, like Bridget knows so well. That's how communities organize nowadays. So how do you be on WhatsApp, but as a journalist in service of city, and to be much, much closer to the ground?
Okay, love that. Khosi, last thoughts from you, and also any idea of what we can be doing better in this industry?
I think that, and I was saying this to Ferial and yourself, that we perhaps need to drop the paternalistic approach, right, that we inherited from our male bosses and owners, that attitude that in order for me to make an impact in the world, I need to act in a certain way and view a world in a particular lens, and hide myself from it, because I've been conditioned to believe that my views and my opinions don't matter. So it's all about deliberately making that conscious choice that when I enter into this space, I need to represent the 51 plus women who are here in South Africa and what really interests them. So I think that we need to get rid of that woman's desk mindset. I think that we should look, there are a few tools, WhatsApp, for example. One of my favorite publications I receive on WhatsApp, and I read it till the end, and it is on PDF. So we tend to think that we need these great innovations. We need the next Facebook, we need the next Instagram, we need the next platform. And sometimes, in order to protect us while still serving, good old PDF, guys. I can't even tell you how accessible the continent, how accessible the continent is because of its of its WhatsApp strategy. And I suppose I have to come back to you and your voice notes. So there's sparks of creative ways of getting around everything else. And lastly, AI. is what it is, and this is a different event. But using AI to hyper-target the people that we really want to talk to can really help us. Instead of going through rows and rows and rows of raw data, use AI to enable you to target your audience
Yeah.
effectively, efficiently, and target what it is that really concerns them. What is the sentiment? Fill the room without first rushing to see what was yesterday's most read story. Because there's a lot of nuances in looking at that data alone.
Yeah.
Why that story was a leading story yesterday. Today it is not. So you ought to be in touch with your community.
That was amazing. Thank you, ladies. Please stay seated. Those are all my questions, but we have such a rich resource in the room. While I ask you guys to think about your questions, can I ask Kajal to come up and put up our link for our survey? So while we take questions, I want you guys to also just fill in our survey and tell us how you found this event. At the same time, can I ask Tejo to come get the mic here? You can put the survey on behind me. And you can take it to people. If the sound guys can put that mic on, and we can go around the room. And you can just switch that mic on, please, Tejo. So we'd love to take some questions. We have amazing people in the room, as I said. I see Beauregard, my old colleague, is at the back. Hello, Beauregard. So that is the QR code. You can scan that with your phone and just fill in our survey while we take these last questions. I'd be super grateful. And then at the same time, can I ask who would like to ask? We'll take 3 questions, and then we'll go from there. Okay, I'll take the lady in the pale pink jacket over there first, and then Ella at the back. And who else had their hand up?
Tando.
Oh, and Tando? Did Tando have a hand up? Where? Yeah. Oh, that was Tando. Okay. Hello, Tando.
Hello, my name is Tando Mayego, and yes, I'm a woman in media. This is a fascinating discussion. But one thing I want to highlight is just the changing nature of media with the news influences and how people engage in media. Do you think this shift is creating more opportunities for women in media, or just new versions of the same barriers as described by the panelists?
Great. Tando, I'm sorry for not recognizing you, but thank you. That was a great question. Ella.
I have a question for, well, I guess all of you. You were all editors. How does media ownership and the nature of media funding affect the way you go about trying to report on women? How much time you're able to allocate to sourcing those stories? If there's no data, maybe putting a reporter on a beat where a woman's issue is somehow part of that. How does the demographics of who owns the publication affect that? And then, of course, not all publications are for profit, like, say, donor funds or something like that. So the nature and demographics of ownership, how does that affect the reporting?
Another great question. Thank you so much. Gail was next, the lady over here in pink. Thanks, Tejo.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gail Smith. Thank you for a great panel, really great inputs. I guess I have a real concern because I think the issue of women's exclusion and the whole notion of having women, feminist journalists and editors who are covering these stories. I think the fact that the Daily Maverick is putting a very senior journalist onto this, or the senior journalist is choosing this. But I think what we often forget is that there's also a level of skill and involvement, that skill involved in gender reporting. And while gender as a profession really grew exponentially for 20 years, it has now slumped and plummeted so badly. There's no more money going into gender desks. There are no more gender desks, and now we need them more than ever. So I guess my question to the panel and to the women in these positions is, do you think you have sufficient resources to try to do the kind of gendered reporting that is required? Because it is a specific skill, it is a specific analysis that is required. And not to, just to say South Africa has that skill, a lot of women who are qualified to do that kind of work. But I think there's often this assumption that gender just comes because one is a woman. And so my point really is, to what extent are you going to be putting resources, or do you put resources into having not just women there, but women or men who are qualified and interested in doing the kind of deep analytical work that is often required to bring a gender analysis to to a news story. And recognizing, I'll just share an anecdote. About 2 years ago, I did a session on gender responsive budgeting with National Treasury and the Department of Women. And the staffers from both of those organizations admitted that they had no gender analysis skills. They were being trained by the Canadians, they said.
Canadians again.
30 years later, they didn't have the skill. So I guess now that we need it more than ever, is there going to be, I mean, Nicki, you spoke very eloquently about not wanting women's desks, but I would argue now more than ever we need gender desks, which is what the New York Times has done. They actually have a gender editor and an entire team doing that kind of work. So it's just to the question of resources and to how important you think that's going to be, and if you're going to put those sorts of resources into doing the kind of gendered reporting that is required to re-engage women.
Thank you, Gail. Okay, guys, some tough questions there. I'm gonna throw it open to the whole panel. So Thando asked about are influencers been given more opportunities for women? I mean, is in the influencer world providing more opportunities for women, or is it more of the same in terms of entrenching patriarchy? Ella asked about media ownership and its effect on women and resources. And you've heard Gail's question. Who would like to go first?
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
I may just forget. To Tando's question, Thando, I think that the digital divide is real. Internet costs are a real threat to our social democracy. It is real in the sense that you have the urban youth. I happen to live in 3 very different worlds. And I move from this world and I go right in the Transkei, the former Transkei, in Ngeleni. And there people literally have to scramble to find 15 rands just so that they can get data, so that they can, we call it data here, which is mobile, the internet, so that they could very quickly send a voice note to their husband who's in Rustenburg working in the mines. Then I moved to Sandton, and I'm faced with unlimited Wi-Fi everywhere I go. In these spaces, I'm never shut off. You see what that does now? And then I move into the winelands, for example, and you find these farm laborers who are in exactly the same situation as in England in the Eastern Cape. So we are, my real fear is the digital divide, resulting in massive inequality, in massive knowledge inequality throughout. The issue about ownership, I'm still very much a purist. I keep a very clear line between editorial and I know, but we have to, ownership I do not think should be a factor when we're making editorial decisions. I don't think that it is not a factor currently. I'm saying it should not be a factor. So I can only answer it to that extent. It shouldn't be a factor. Public interest journalism, if that is what we're practicing, should be that. And there's various tests for us to see if the story is really in the public interest or not. The last question has to do with...
Well, you don't have to answer all of them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But thank you, though. Those are some good
Thank
answers.
you. No, thank you
like
very
trying
much.
to get through it all. Do you guys have any thoughts on the questions that were put forward? I mean, the last one was Gail's, but the media ownership one as well.
Sure. So when I leave here now, I'm going to put the finishing touches on a panel. We had a readers panel on the absence of street lights in Joburg. So I mean, as Joburg women, just by show of hands, is like it's so dark driving around or in taking public transport. It impacts your life, right? So once when I asked the question on X, do you have street lights in your area? I got thousands of responses, put them into a spreadsheet, and most of the people responding were women. Because not having street lights impacts your freedom to move, it impacts your ability to have a nightlife, it impacts your family life, it just impacts your freedom in ways untold. Now, the only reason I know how to do that is because I come through the school of Colleen Lomona and Pat Made and all the women who taught me to look and report with a gendered lens.
Nice.
That kind of training is not happening any longer. From the time I was a trainee up to an editor, I was always going to be sent on courses to be taught to look like that. So now I'll just say to Naledi, and to Anissa who doing it, hey, there's a piece of, there's a reading I found on how street lighting impacts women's lives in cities. Let's look at it as we do our roundtable. But it's certainly not happening in a structured way any longer, Gail. Huh?
Which is true of so many beats. And I hate to say this, but then the thing that gets affected first is the gender, right? So training isn't happening in so many beats, and then the gendered one is the first one to take the fall.
That is certainly the case. I mean, if I look at what my newsroom priorities are, I mean, as a woman and as a feminist journalist myself, I cannot say that a gender desk is on my priority list.
Unfortunately.
Because, it's just not something we can afford. The fact that, we have had such incredible shifts in the media, the advertising industry, or advertising has tanked. There's so many financial constraints on media houses. I mean, if I look, and if you look at the news cycle, I have 5 crime reporters. Nothing says South Africa like I have 5 crime reporters. And those people are busy.
Yeah.
They're incredibly busy. We are on crime, we are on court, and because that moves the needle for us, because that's what our people want to read. Well, we try and do a little bit different, but I absolutely agree with Ferial about having the gendered lens being on everything. I mean, we relentlessly cover stories of domestic violence and femicide because we need to.
Yeah.
And yes, it's normal. It's not news anymore, but we do cover it relentlessly because it is our duty to do it. And we will do things that are not popular stories, that may not get the numbers, but because they're stories we need to do. We're unapologetic about that. Also have at my own organization, having so many women in senior management, it really helps. You don't have to fight anyone to get your, to get your agenda done. We do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So, but it is, I mean, a gender desk would be marvelous, but...
Which is different from a woman's desk. I just want to make that distinction. A gender desk would be about gendered issues, right?
Yeah.
And I think what they were talking about is like, women's, like a pink desk.
Yeah, no.
But I don't want to end on that depressing note, because it is, and I do wonder if we're being a little bit naive, because I have to be honest, Ella, like I'm a media owner, technically. There just is no money, and I hate saying that, but it's true. I mean, there's very little money compared to what there used to be. When I started off in newsrooms, there were internship training programs. Like Ferial came up through a cadet program in the Mail and Guardian. People forget about those things that existed. I went to shadow Ferial while I was studying journalism, and I was fascinated. I was like a woman editor. But the point is, those things are increasingly not there, and we can't be naive and say, we don't know. We do know. It's just the money isn't there, and we're trying to figure it out. Places like me, my fellow media entrepreneurs from the continent to even well-resourced places like Becky Sisa are all trying to figure this stuff out. How do we train people up? So we've kind of run out of time on questions, but I want to just, if you can just indulge me, if I want to just make sure I don't miss anyone. Are there any more questions before we? Okay, over there. So if I can ask you to go over there. If you can introduce yourself, please. Anyone else who would like to state something or say a question before we wrap up? Over there, okay. So if you can go to that lady and the one over there.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the panel and the speakers. I really appreciated it. So I'm Senem Mtembu, and my background is in financial services, in analytics and partnerships. But what got me thinking was what was proposed about the influencer reporting that needs to be inducted into the code of ethics. And it's got me thinking about that we have a lot of experts, right? What have been the barriers, or maybe there's a solution, but how do we induct them into the code of ethics, but also to get them to start writing? The Black Book also got me thinking as well. So these people have a voice, they probably want to contribute to the information economy, but how?
And while we go into the next question, I just want to say we did invite people like Dan Corder, Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, those big influencers. And in many ways, they do see themselves as apart from us. But I think we need to start bridging those gaps. And I know people like Kate Skinner and SANEF are having those conversations?
Actually, weirdly, so I chair the Diversity and Ethics Committee at SANEF. And we really, really need to have a code because the press code governs us, right? So we all ascribe to the press code and there's a code of conduct and you can do this, you can't do that, etc., etc. But influencers are out there wilding with the potential of like doing serious harm. We need to urgently codify, and it's something that we did speak about at our last diversity and ethics meeting. We've got to actually have, I don't know, a 10 commandments of
but then also bring
or
them
something
into the
and bring them into
so
the
they say yes.
conversation. And also we were thinking about holding workshops, ethics workshops at different, host meeting houses around the country. And that's certainly something that we need to look at doing. In terms of how they can monetize this, I mean, that would, and we would certainly be open to bringing them into the fold, but then obviously, how they earn a living and all of that then comes into play.
Complicated, yeah.
And it is very complicated, but certainly on the ethics.
So we're running out of time. I just want to take a
There.
quick comment from Sis Pat who had a response to that and then go to our last question.
Just on the code of ethics question, there isn't going to be a new code for other people.
She's like,
There
it's the
isn't going
press
to be a new
code.
code. The fact is, journalism is grounded on media ethics that are contained in that code. So if a podcaster or a content creator wants to operate in the journalistic space, they are covered by the same code. And we are starting to see some of them joining the press council.
Amazing.
And
Good.
we are training them on the code because that is what guides journalism and good journalism.
And
So
information.
there isn't going to be
Yeah.
a new code for them.
Yeah.
A code, we only have one code. We only have one set of media ethics.
Thank you.
Nice.
I need to give you a round of applause for that because the press code, I don't think enough South Africans know how lucky we are to live in a society governed
really
by the
are.
press
We
code.
really are.
In a country like America, you would have to have enough money to go find a lawyer to defend your rights. And in South Africa, most news publications have signed up, and those who haven't are pariahs, I have to say.
They really
have
are.
signed up to the press code, and that means if I talk nonsense about you, you don't need any money to lay a complaint against me, and I have to take it down, and I have to apologize. That is rare. Anyway, our last question.
Hi everyone, my name is Tando Sope. I'm a video journalist with Reuters covering Sub-Saharan Africa. Just to add on what you mentioned earlier about training people up, I'm wondering what efforts are being put into retaining talent, because I'm seeing the influencers that you speak about are a bunch of journalists actually moving into the digital space who do care about the code of conduct and their names and their faces. It's people whose bylines we've seen. It's people I've worked with on the field and who care about journalism. So what efforts are being put into actually retaining that talent? Because these people are not only just moving to digital for egotistical reasons. Some are time that you spoke about. It frees up so much time off your hands, and also money. If you're getting better money digitally, why not move that way? So, what are you doing to retain talent in traditional media as well? Thank you.
Thanks, Tando, and that will be our last question, and we can just answer that.
Well, retaining talent is always an issue. In a shrinking media landscape, there's a shortage of jobs, and there's some really, really good people out there. I mean, I wish I could hire. There's so many people I wish I could hire, but I just can't. So it's about, for me, it's about not just the money. It's about how do you retain people? How is it? What is it like to work in your newsroom? Do you how good are you at leading people? How are you at how compassionate are you as an organization? Because another thing that confronts journalism is an incredibly difficult space to work in. I mean, out there it's enemy territory a lot of the time. We have threats. We have lawsuits. Exactly. So it's so vital to have a space inside your newsroom that is a safe space for people to come to and work from, so that they can do their best work. But yeah, I'm open to any and all ideas on retaining talent.
Well,
Thank you.
the discussion's going to continue after this. I want to say thank you to you guys for your questions.
Very
Thank
nice.
you to the panelists.